And Gordon Chang joins me here on the desk at CBSN. He's the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Thanks for being here, Mr. Chang.
Well, thank you so much.
So let's get right into the United States is saying that they're not sure that this may have been a hydrogen bomb that was detonated. What does your expertise tell you?
My sense is that this was a simple atomic weapon. It might have been boosted with a hydrogen isotope, but I don't think it was an H-bomb as we understand that term. You know, there are a couple of clues, and one of them is that the initial reading is that this was a 6-kiloton device. That's important because the 2013 detonation, the last one, was also 6 kilotons. Now, we won't know for quite some time. As a matter of fact, in 2013, we sent our sniffer planes up and down the North Korean coast for weeks. We were not able to tell whether that was a plutonium core device or uranium core device, and we still don't know. So, you know, this one, we may never know whether it was an H-bomb or not, but I suspect it wasn't.
So that's an interesting point that you make, that it was a 6-kiloton explosion. For context, for our viewers, the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons, right? So we're talking about a much less powerful device than even the one that was dropped back in 1945.
Right, and that was a very elemental one. You know, when you start thinking about the devices that the United States and the Soviet Union were building in the 1950s, we measure those in megatons. Wow. So there's going to be a big difference in explosive power. But to me, you know, it's nonetheless important that they were working on an atomic device, which means that they're perfecting their warheads that they can put on their KN-08 missile.
And that missile is important because
it has the range, the U.S. military believes, it has the range to hit the northern part of the west coast of the United States. Now, this missile has not been tested, but nonetheless, it's derivative of a Soviet design from all that we can tell, so it doesn't need to be tested. The North Koreans probably can put a warhead on top of that missile, launch it to the United States, and, you know, our missile defense system is rudimentary. So this, I think, is very close to a present threat.
So let's talk a little bit about the reality of that. You've studied North Korea very, very closely. The idea that they would actually launch a missile towards the United States and perhaps not even towards South Korea, if that was their intention, is that really, I mean, Marco Rubio, who's running for president of the United States, has called North Korea's leader a lunatic. Do you think that they would actually launch a missile towards the United States?
I don't think so, and the reason is every missile that is launched has what's called a return address. We know exactly where it's launched. And if they actually did launch a warhead at us, we would retaliate, and it would be massive retaliation. So it would essentially be suicide. Now, Kim Jong-un is not secure in his regime, which means that although he's rational, he's not a lunatic, although he's rational, he may have incentives that are very different from ours, and so we do have to be concerned. Every once in a while, North Korea reaches out and does something really horrific. So, for instance, in 2010, they killed 50 South Koreans in 2 terrible incidents. So this is a regime that operates according to a much different logic than ours.
And that logic has a lot to do with retention of power. In other words, Kim Jong-un is, as you point out, in a very precarious position. He doesn't have the support that his father Kim Jong-il had. So he's doing these things in an effort to bolster his reputation,
his legitimacy, and his position in the regime. And that's a very important point that you make, because there's a couple of political issues here. First of all, there's Kim Jong-un trying to consolidate his position in the regime, which is like 300 or 400 senior figures. But it's also the regime trying to consolidate its position in North Korean society, because although the economy these days is not horrible, it's like 1% or so growth for the last 3 or 4 years, nonetheless, people are not necessarily happy. And so, therefore, the regime needs to show itself to be strong. One of the ways to do that is to lash out against South Korea and Japan, which are our treaty allies, and also to lash out against us. So there are a lot of instability here. You know, normally things shouldn't go wrong, but we also know that in the Korean Peninsula, there have been times when things have gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, and so now we're hearing that the United Nations is going to pursue more sanctions against North Korea. have sanctions worked? I mean, and there's a lot of politicians out there on the campaign trail now, and they're talking about, this has failed Obama, Clinton presidency. The North Koreans first detonated a nuclear explosion underground in 2006. George W. Bush was president. The Pakistanis launched their first nuclear device when Clinton was president. I mean, does it really matter who's in the Oval Office, and do these sanctions work? Because clearly North Korea is pursuing this line of trying to gain a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, the failure in Washington with regard to North Korea has been bipartisan. This administration and the two previous ones have failed where they shouldn't have failed. And so we're dealing with a situation which is not a Democratic or a Republican one. It's just the consensus about how to deal with North Korea is wrong. Now, look, yes, we're not sanctioned out on North Korea. We can impose more. But more important than putting on sanctions is enforcing the ones that we have. Also, I think the United States needs to put pressure on our allies, South Korea, have a very difficult conversation about what's called this Kaesong Industrial Park, where South Korean businesses are involved in North Korea, shovel a lot of money to the regime. And of course, we need some very, very difficult conversations with China, which has allowed sanctions violations and which has transferred to the North Koreans some very dangerous military equipment, including the mobile launchers for that KN-08 missile, which I talked about. That is extremely dangerous because that's their first usable missile, which is actually a weapon that they can use against us.
How does Iran play into all of this?
North Korea and Iran for more than 15 years, going back to the 1990s, have had partnerships on both nuclear technology as well as long-range ballistic missiles. The North Koreans, every time that they have detonated a device, the first 3 times, Iranian technicians were on site in North Korea. I think we're going to learn that today was the 4th time.
They were there. They are part of what we're seeing happening in North Korea.
Absolutely. And this is also true for all of North Korea's long-range ballistic missile tests. Iranians were on site. We have this Iranian nuclear deal. And yes, the Iranians probably don't have a nuclear weapon on Iranian soil, but they've got it in North Korea. So this means that we need to look at this not just as an Iran problem or a North Korea problem. We need to look at this on a consolidated basis.
It's an interesting discussion. Would love to keep it going. I just have one last question before we wrap. If you know this about the Iranian-North Korean connection, can we assume, as those of us here living in the United States, that our intelligence officials, that are the Department of Defense, that the Pentagon is also aware of this and are taking steps to ensure that there is nothing malicious going on vis-a-vis our security here in the United States?
They certainly know it because I do not have a security clearance. But, it's not an issue of what we know, because I think we know these things. It's an issue of political will and what the various administrations will do to stop the North Korean program. As I mentioned, there's bipartisan failure. And although we may know a lot of what's going on, we haven't had the political will to stop it.
Gordon Chang, thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.